When I was first interviewing to be a pastor for my very first job, like 14, 15 years ago, a very smart, earnest mom of two was on the hiring committee. And she was chauffeuring me around in there and taking me from meeting to meeting and just peppering me with questions. And I remember her sharing with me that her husband was not a Christian and she was having a difficult time getting her middle school children to be interested. Sound familiar? Yeah, she wanted to know what she should do. And I asked her, well, what is it you want them to know? What is it you want to pass on to them? Can you be specific? And she really didn't have a good answer. And we talked for a while, and I just said, well, are there practices that bring you comfort and peace? And about the only thing she could come up with was the lighting of the Advent wreath. And I said, well, that's the place to start. She knew a life of faith as a spiritual practice for her was going to church and sitting on a committee. And by the way, she was excellent at committee work. But when it came to what it was she wants to pass on, she hadn't given that a whole lot of thought. What it meant for her to be a part of this church. And today is Pentecost. This is the birthday of the church. And it's when we recognize that Jesus left the world physically. But in the Gospel of John, you may or may not know this passage, Jesus says, don't worry, when I'm gone, I'm going to send you the advocate, the Spirit, to lead you when I cannot be physically present. And so that is today, and that is our beautiful, beautiful story. Thank you for the reading, Melinda. And so we hear of how awe-inspiring and crazy-making and, what a story. And we mark that as the start of the church. And so happy birthday, church. 2,000-ish years later, you are starting to show a little age. But now, I joke about that, but actually I'm going to do perhaps a roast of the church today, but not more of the, not of the church in terms of God bringing the church, but more of the human interpretation of the church, known as the institutional church. Oh boy, someone says. Yes, because we all know, let's not pretend, we all know the news. Institutional churches are dying, period. And that is just what it is to be a church-going person in 2024 in this part of the world. And that right there does not make a good slogan for a birthday party. And so, here we go. Because sometimes at birthday parties, we tell stories on a person, and so I thought, let's talk about this hard one that's right here in front of us and not pretend like we don't all see it. So this may feel roasty at first, but hopefully we'll get to a little bit of celebration at the end. Okay. So here's more of my story. 13 years ago, I joined that church after talking with that woman because it was a great conversation. So please hear me say that too. I love these conversations. I love it when you say this is really hard and I'm like, okay, let's go. It didn't scare me away. And I worked hard in that church as their associate pastor, and I went to conferences and I read books and I talked to people and I signed up for everything I could sign up for. And basically what I found was that in that place, if you wanted to start a youth group, you needed to start it 30 years ago. Because the only successful programs that were running or that could be started seemed to be ones that already existed. And so my friends, my other associate friends, who looked really good because they had these big programs, honestly told me, well, I inherited this one. And I was like, well, that's not helpful. And 6 years of struggle short, the way to get a youth group going was one of two things. One is that I needed to become much more conservative or Catholic so I could have guilt on my side, and I could tell you that you needed to get yourself to church, Or I needed to be in a very small community where there was nowhere else to go. And the church was the only place where youth could be after school. And I lived in Marin, so there were a lot of options, right? So guilt wasn't going to work for me, and neither was entrapment. And that's okay, because I don't associate either of those words with Jesus. And I hope you don't either. So about 5 years into this, I decided to stop going to the official clergy gatherings and conferences because I was exhausted. I was just exhausted from hitting my head against the wall of trying to do this thing that wasn't seeming to go. And every time I would go to a clergy gathering, it was so anxious, I would get depressed. And it became this, I became a part of the system where everyone would kind of walk around and be like, I'm doing this great thing in my church. But then, once you really started to talk to them, they had 4 kids and they were just like you. And we were just all kind of putting our best idea forward instead of really talking about how hard it was to be in this space where you're trying to hold a youth group together with duct tape. And that's on a good Sunday. And so I started going to other things and doing art. And I went to a singing conference. And I started doing things that felt like they would be good for my spirit. And I'm so glad I did. I'm so glad I listened to that. But to get back to our story, I know that some of you also feel this grief of watching an institution called mainline Protestantism that we not only, that we watch and we know that it is suffering, it is declining, it is dying. And it is heart-rending, aching to know that it is not something that we are passing down to our young people. And we are at a place where passing along this tradition as we know it is quite possibly simply not going to happen for most of us or many of us. And those of us who are parents with young or with adult children, I see you, and I know that you didn't do anything wrong. I know that you all did the right things and you did your best, whatever that is, not judging here. And as your kids got older, you probably took them to church or decided it wasn't the right church, and so you didn't. Either way, but let me just talk to those who tried to take their kids to church. As they got older, you probably fought with them on numerous Sundays. And you really wanted to be the parent that walked in because you knew it was good for you and it was good for them. And you wonder what you did wrong because now that they're older and grown, they didn't do that, go do their own thing in their 20s and come back. They just kept doing their own thing. And maybe when they're in town or you can corral them, they'll come with you on Christmas and Easter or Mother's Day. And maybe you are still trying to get them to come. I know my mom, when I go home, it's like, well, on Sunday we're going to, and if my brother's there, it is an interesting conversation about what it is we really want to do on a family, as a family, on a Sunday. And so I say this because I'm in this conversation too, when one of the roles I wear is child, who was bribed with donuts from 6th grade on. And as I got older, those donuts weren't as enticing as they once were, right? I have fought my hardest. I have eaten a lot of donuts in the name of going to Sunday school and being a good kid. And as an adult and as a pastor, I have listened to parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles bemoan and pine and lament. This is something that we have given our lives to, and those coming behind us do not seem to share our desire to be here. And so I wonder if we might just take a moment to acknowledge that it is sad and disappointing when we feel like something we love is not connecting with people we love. So let's just take that moment. God, in your grace, you hear our prayers. And I wonder if on our church's birthday, we might give thanks for all of the wonderful ways the church writ large has helped us in our lives. And some of us, that's a bigger list. Some of us, that's a shorter list. But there's a reason we're here. There's a reason we're here looking for God on a Sunday. And so something has been working for some of us, right? So can we just hold a moment and give thanks for everything that this thing called institutional church has given to us? God, in your grace, you hear our prayers. And I would be remiss if I didn't also talk about all that God does for us that is outside the so-called institutional church. So let's just remember that God is speaking through all of creation all of the time. And so can we just take another moment and give thanks for those other things and people and places that fill us up, that you might think, oh, we can't talk about that on a Sunday. Yeah, you can. Was God there with you? Let us give thanks. Let's just take that moment. God, in your grace, you hear our prayers. Ooh, that was a good one. Y'all are waking up. All right. Hey, friends, all of those things that we just give thanks for, those are from God. Those are gifts of the Spirit's moving and loving and holding us. Those are the things that we have to lean on, and perhaps are some of the things that we need to consider are the things that we want to pass on to each other and to those who come behind us. Because in those things where we are finding God, we are the body of Christ. And the Spirit is leading and guiding in those moments, thanks be to God. And now I want to challenge us to lean into our scripture a little bit in the story of Pentecost. And I want to just remind us of the setting, because the people were probably not feeling so hot. I don't know when or if the disciples ever decided to listen to Jesus when he told them things, but they weren't good at it when he was alive. And he has said, hey, don't worry, there's this other thing coming. But I suspect that they were not feeling so hot because Jesus had died, and then he came back, and then he left again. And their system has been utterly disrupted again and again and again. And what we know about our faith from our tradition, thanks be to God, is that there is power in resurrection. In knowing that good things can come out of death. But death has to come first, and that is our Christian rhythm. Death and then resurrection. In that order, I'm sorry to tell you. Death and then new life. And I know that for some of us, it's challenging to trust this. And resurrection does not mean resuscitation. It means new life. And death is hard. And it is hard to trust that as pieces, it is hard to trust because we love whatever it is that had to go. And it's hard to trust that those pieces and processes and institutions are okay to let go. But I know that God does wonders with broken pieces. God does amazing things on the other side. And you may be a literal thinker, so let me also just offer that avoiding death can mean avoiding lots of things. And it doesn't have to be physical. It could be our egos, our assumptions. It could be our pride or our comfort levels. Here's what I know about church death. You can't buy your way out of it. You can't read enough books to get out of it either. Tried that one. I don't have all the money in the world, but I've had a lot of time to read a lot of things and to talk to a lot of people. And I know that you can't keep doing the same things in the same ways and expect new results, which means we have to start letting things go and give thanks for their usefulness and what they have meant to us, and grieve that we're not in the place that we had hoped that we might be. And we're the UCC. We can remember that God is not done with us yet, that God is still speaking. And that is a piece of that institution we should just cling to because it's amazing. And if we are willing to listen and willing to be curious and willing to perhaps even let some things that we've loved go, then perhaps resurrection is possible. And we can go down this path, or we can kind of shake our heads from the new things and go, those people are crazy and drunk on new wine. What are they doing? Well, joke's on them, because God is always doing new things. And God isn't dependent on the size of a church or a church's budget or where they worship. These are human things. So what I can tell you after reading a ton of books and talking to a ton of people about church death is I have a list of a couple of things that are big, but I want to pass them to you because I think they're also things that we can all do together. One is to get curious. Ask questions. Question yourself, question others. We'll talk about what that looks like in a second. But to get curious, not just generally, but about God's dream. Listen for God's dream. Because I know you all feel it in your hearts, and I know that at this point in our lives, we all think, that's a cute Sunday school moment. But we've been knocked down so many times, we don't know that we're actually going to be able to make any impact. And I'm seeing some people go, yeah. So get curious, listen for God's dream. 3, let us celebrate. Let us celebrate. God's presence is in our midst. Let us celebrate as often as possible, especially when we meet God in new places. We have a lot to celebrate just today. Thank you, Judy, for leading us and for this Rose Parade. And do you know what's in the coverage of that parade yesterday? The news doesn't know how to pronounce our name, which is great. Because you know what that means? That means they have to talk about us tomorrow in a reprint and retract it. And so now we're getting press for 2 days. So joke's on you. I love this. I love that we could be talking about our name a lot in the next couple of weeks, and people are going to want to look it up. Well, that's good news for us. Thank you for the free press. 4, how will we know when we are following the Spirit? We just did it. We know it because fire lights up in our eyes and our faces get excited. That's how you know there is a light in someone else's eyes. And assuming they're not like a sociopath, you're in the right place. The Spirit enlivens us, and we have to follow that. We have to follow that. When we feel that disturbance in the force, if you will, it may not be a literal tongue of fire sitting on someone, but we know it when we feel it and we see it. And when we see those lies around us lighting up, stick with whatever you're doing. Choir, I'm going to guess, Bill, do they have a fire in their eyes when they're excited about music? Yeah, it's probably really good to be you when they're like, yeah, right? Yeah, so you all know it. I know you know it.
It's real good to watch the fire in his eyes, too, while he's directing.
I have no doubt that you also might encourage some of that, right? We need to encourage that in one another. And I want to invite you to spiritual practices. Now some of you might be like, ooh, that's a lot, or that's scary. Maybe you already have a practice. And so all I'm saying is I want to encourage you to keep doing it. We can talk again. If you want to talk about that, love to talk some more. But I would love for you to have a better answer than that mom did, who was like, I don't know what I want to pass on. Because I want you to have a practice that you can say over time is something that helps you reconnect with that fire. Personally, I have like 6 practices, and they come and go, but the one that's the most consistent is gardening and touching the earth. I need to touch creation, and I need to feel it. I also need quiet time. Meditation time. So I don't know what it is for you, but I hope not only do you have it, but you can name it and you can claim it and say, God is here. And I know it because my spouse says, when I come back in from the garden, my eyes are lit up and I'm bubbly. Right? She doesn't always say that after worship, but I like being here too. I like being here a lot too. So 6 is my recap. I'm going to say it again because it's important. Listen, be curious, let us be joyful together, and the key here is to do it together. We are the church. Not I am the church. We are the church, and we are supposed to build each other up. So let's wonder and be curious and listen together. Let us serve one another and our neighbors with renewed imagination, with fire in our eyes and joy in our hearts. And as much as I would like to tell you what's going to happen on the other side of all of these 6 fabulous ideas that I'm throwing at you today, which should not be new, I don't know what specifically this will look like for us as a church. But I can tell you how much fun it is to be in a room full of people whose eyes are shining. And I know that that is contagious. And that is the Spirit enlivening a group, and that is fun. And that will lead us to wherever else we need to go. That will lead us in our next steps. Because God's dream is contagious. And our kids and our grandkids and our neighbors will be thankful to have a place where people can come to be reminded of who they are and who God is with them. So we'll figure out the institutional stuff, but let us be intentional about letting the Spirit really guide us today and every day moving forward. So may it be.